All right, folks, welcome back to the Big Dog Podcast. I'm Jason Reed, holding it down with my co-host, Lisa Saunders. Today, we're talking about something that kind of gets overlooked, but it's absolutely critical if you want your compressor to last: the air you feed it. And I'm not talking about just any air. This is about what happens when you suck in everything from dust and dirt to humidity and even exhaust from that old diesel truck out at the dock.
Hey everyone, so glad you're here. We always say in this business, garbage in, garbage out, but with compressors, it gets even worse. Whatever junk that's floating in the air outside or inside your plant ends up way more concentrated after it goes through the compression process, like 8 times more concentrated if you're running 100 psi. It's actually kind of wild to think about.
Yeah, and that's something I see way too often. I remember visiting this shop out in Arizona, right? Middle of the summer. They were pulling in 105-degree air straight off the desert. All that airborne sand and fine dust, it didn't just clog their filters, it was tearing up their compressor from the inside out. The wear on those components was honestly brutal. They thought it was just hot air, but that heat was destroying oil life too. Not to mention energy costs went through the roof.
And it's not just about heat or dirt. Think about places like food plants and pharma, where even a little bit of contamination can mess up an entire batch. If your compressor's near a loading dock and pulling in diesel fumes, you're setting yourself up for filter clogs and valve problems, but even worse, you're risking your product quality. There's just so much that can go wrong if you're not paying attention to that intake air.
Totally. And it's easy to forget that the compressor can only give you what you put in. Or, like we said last episode, you can have the fanciest equipment out there, but if the air going in is trash, you're basically sabotaging your own operation.
So let's dig into what you actually need to be watching out for. First up, dust and dirt. We touched on it, but it really deserves its own spotlight. If you're in an environment with a lot of particulates, they'll end up clogging your filters super fast, and that's just the beginning. Once they're past the filter, those particles cause actual abrasion inside the compressor, wear, tear, and sometimes straight-up failures.
Exactly. And for oil-flooded compressors, if dirt sneaks through, it'll get into your lubricant. That messes with coalescing filters and can contaminate your oil system. Suddenly, you're not just dealing with air quality issues, you're looking at a much shorter lifespan for all those critical parts. It hits efficiency and bumps up your maintenance costs, too. Nobody wants that.
And then there's moisture. You've heard us talk about moisture mayhem in our earlier episodes. It's the classic system killer. Humidity not only leads to rust and corrosion in the compressor, it hits your lines, blocks things up, and even degrades the oil. If you get water mixing with your lubricant, you're pretty much guaranteed some downtime sooner or later.
Right, and hey, if you missed our Moisture Mayhem episode, go check it out. It's a big one. But moving on, organic matter. People don't always think about this, but especially if you're in food, beverage, or medical production, tiny things like bacteria and mold spores can actually get pulled in and pass right through a basic filter. It's no joke when all it takes is a little contamination to ruin your product.
That's actually a perfect segue. I worked with a bakery once that learned that lesson the hard way. A whole batch of bread ruined because a couple of mold spores made it through their air system. Their filters were just standard issue, not really designed for that level of filtration. You could see the mold spots plain as day. It was a total loss.
And don't even get me started on exhaust fumes. Diesel from the loading dock? That'll clog your filters, damage valves, and even mess up oil-free compressors. Nobody's immune. So all those factors, dirt, moisture, organics, exhaust, even just high temps, they pile up. And like we always say, the problems multiply once you compress it. The good news is you don't have to just live with it. There's a decent checklist of best practices that'll keep your intake air clean and your system running better, longer. First up, location. If you can, keep your compressor indoors away from sources of dust and exhaust. But that's not always enough. Sometimes indoor air isn't all that clean either, especially if the room's small or not ventilated right.
Yeah, if you do set up inside, you want that compressor in its own enclosed space, but with solid ventilation. Don't forget, every extra compressor adds to the heat, so your vent requirements scale up fast. If you go the extra mile and draw fresh outside air in through a duct system, just make sure you're nowhere near the loading dock. No one wants diesel exhaust in their lines.
And let's talk piping for a second. Avoid sharp 90-degree bends if you can. Each one acts like adding way more pipe length, which means pressure drop and less efficiency. If you're stuck with bends, upsize your pipe to compensate, but really minimizing those turns makes a big difference.
And this can't be said enough. Inspect those filters every couple thousand hours minimum. Follow what your manufacturer tells you and stick with OEM filters instead of the budget almost fits variety. Even a slightly clogged filter can raise your energy bill by 1% or 2%, and it snowballs from there.
Exactly. And don't sleep on air treatment, especially if you're in a clean or regulated industry. Sometimes you need more advanced filtration to hit those ISO 8573.1 standards. That's when it's worth working with someone who really knows what they're doing. Your local factory-trained expert, for example.
And the payoff's real. I remember a plant that was always calling in for maintenance, over and over. Once they got serious about intake air and worked with a qualified pro, they cut their maintenance visits in half within a year. Less downtime, less wasted money, happier operators. That's just good business sense, right?
Yeah, and that's what we're about here. Practical stuff that works. So don't forget, clean, cool, dry air is the starting point for everything else your compressor does. Take care of your intake, and you're setting yourself up for better reliability and lower costs down the line.
Couldn't have said it better, Jason. If you're listening and you want to go deeper, reach out to your local experts or Cation's team, honestly. It's worth it. That's it for today. Thanks for hanging out with us.
All right, Lisa. Always good to have your stories and perspective. We'll be back next time with another no-nonsense look at what really matters in compressed air. Take care out there and keep those compressors running smooth. See you, Lisa.
See you, Jason. Bye, everyone.